Yeah, the practices. I would say I'm super biased because I'm a homeschooled, self-taught nerd. So it's just I never had that. But
Yeah.
I've worked with tons of people, graduated MIT and Harvard and NYU and one, all of those places, and worked with a lot of them. And I would say that there's different flavors of being self-directed. Honestly, some of the people I worked with, I mean, I know they attended college, but they really just used it so they could get into a job, and then they would just code on the side and do all the things they wanted to do. At this point, I think I've mentored well over 50, probably way more data folks at this point. I used to teach at a coding camp,
Oh, nice.
Brain Station. And it was really interesting. I would say half the cohort, I would get into one of those coding pieces, probably more. They all came, we were all finishing up either data science, or sorry, computer science or some kind of computational background. And they all felt underprepared for going into the workplace. I did study all this stuff, but I actually don't know how to do all this technical work. I know conceptually how it comes together, but practically, no idea.
Right. And I think my background's similar to yours, where a lot of mine was self-taught, especially. And then I went back and went to WGU and got my bachelor's and my master's.
Oh yeah, great university.
Right. It's fantastic for people like us that spent, a decade and a half self-taught, and then just go through and just blow through a bunch of courses.
I would say to narrow the scope of this is, so if we're going to take about, Joe did I'm not sure if he announced the release of his survey.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right. So I got to see a little bit of preview. Joe's very kind and generous with that. And he said, "Oh, you're doing a career piece? Okay, let me help you and give you 1,000 data points to see something." I was, "Oh, okay, this is really interesting."
Nice.
And I think people in the data community, or software engineering community, but a lot of people in the data community don't seem to being labeled with AI engineer because I don't know, probably because we're too close to how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
So I think that I noticed that in the survey. I was like, "Oh, interesting." People no. And I guarantee you, I know several of the people there that on the survey, including myself, I'm use AI, do AI related stuff and AI coding and all that jazz. But I don't even call myself an AI engineer, even though it probably give me an extra 50K. But I think for me, it's just like thinking about a career ladder over the next 2 to 3 years, wherever we're heading there. I still think that engineering as a craft is obviously going to still exist, and we need to have it. I don't think everything is going to be, I don't know, whatever Anthropic's pushing right now, but I think there's a level of it that's true. We all know that. What that looks is that I still need to give some kind of guidance to the people I work with and the people I talk to all the time. And I'm like, okay, well, what are the core, what is true today? What has been true for, I don't know, X years, 20, 30 years?
Yeah.
That will most likely stay. And sure, maybe you don't have to program in C, or I guess today's version Python or whatever it is, but you still need to understand all these concepts. And so as you're progressing through a career ladder, or as your career, and you're looking for these characteristics, I was okay, well, what are these things I point to? I mean, what are you thinking right now and what you're seeing?
And everybody's obsessed with this AI and how AI is going to impact data engineering. And I don't see it any different than when cloud came along, right? When we migrated from on-prem to cloud. It might be a different pace, but we're having to learn new tools and new ways of doing things. And it's an evolution. I think that what we're going to get to is we're going to get to a point where I do think data engineers as a discipline will still be needed, right? Because there's still going to be all these disparate resources, and we're going to have to figure out how to get everything from all these different places, to clean it, to get it in a place and a location and governed that is safe and effective for AI to hit, right? Now, are we going to have these AI tools that are going to help us with those pieces? Absolutely. I'm starting to see that now, even with Claude Code helping to write pipelines in Python that we're pushing into Databricks. And some of it is that prompt engineering piece, right? The better context that you could give the AI, the better your output's going to be. But you still have to understand the core concepts of modeling. I don't think that data modeling is going. I know that Joe's doing his thing, right? and data modeling's dying, and Joe's trying to revive it. But I think that data modeling as a discipline and as a decision tool is still going to be important, right?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to community. Remember, domain modeling and data modeling, they really do have very similar aspects. And if you think about mapping or all kinds of different historical purposes, I think that data modeling, what is it? Ultimately, to me, it's overlaying concepts of what the business or what you're doing is an action.
Right.
When I used to work in manufacturing, is for a flow map. I mean, you're basically trying to understand how things are moving or schematics, right? And I don't see how that could possibly change. I think it will go a lot faster with AI. I think it's going to be a lot of things that we're going to work with that, frankly, data. And then some people are arguing we don't need to do data modeling for AI is just going to know all these things. And I don't know, show it to me. Don't just talk about it. I would like to see a system. I'd like to see, I would love to hear if Anthropic, and then probably could reach out to somebody and be, hey, Anthropic, are you not doing X, Y, and Z data modeling? What are you actually doing? I think that the discipline of data modeling has been pretty weak for a while. But I think a lot of people kind of understanding taxonomies and relations and understanding how things are related. And my background is I used to do imports and exporting. So I tariff codes and all this kind of stuff. I had to have all this stuff. It cost money. And I think a lot of people are forgetting that, there's real implications to classifying things.
Yeah. And I think especially when we're talking about PII and all of the new AI governance stuff that's coming out of Europe, I mean, above and beyond the data sovereignty stuff that's coming out of Europe, that's going to be a whole different story. But I think that that context piece and that modeling piece of it, cloud came along and people forgot that, yes, storage all of a sudden got really cheap.
Yeah.
But scanning those tables didn't get any cheaper. They got more expensive. Because now when we do table scans, we're having to pay compute, right? And so people don't understand modeling in the context of how it impacts compute and cost from a cloud standpoint. And I think that's what I've been kind of harping on with my coaching people is don't just understand how to code and how to move data from A to B, but understand when you do that, when you do use different methods, when you're doing partitioning, when you're doing all of these things to make your code more efficient, how does it actually impact the end results, right? When you model certain ways versus one big table, how does it impact the end result? When you choose a materialized view versus a persisted table, depending on what those, calculations that are going on behind the scenes, how does that impact the cost at the end of the day? I think that kind of that financial operations piece of data engineering is going to be more important as we move forward because of AI assisted coding. We're going to have to, we see those things all the time of AI spits out, 100 lines of code when really maybe it could have been done with 20 lines of code. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a piece about the keyfication of this stuff. And I think we're just going to see lots of waste. And then it's okay. That's just an accepted cost to a certain extent. The question is, to me, is just where data engineering and even analytics engineering, because I think they're kind of going to be combined at some point real soon.
Yeah.
There's a brief moment where they kind of separated, and that's fine. And now it's going to be one and the same, frankly. And I honestly see a lot of data engineers becoming analysts, right? With their AI assistants, right? Just to kind of need to know the business, to kind of need to understand kind of where it's at. So when I'm thinking about career ladder, what you're saying for me is if I scope an engineer, data engineer, I would score them. Okay, so maybe the business strategy component might be a little weaker on the matrix, right?
But still part of the matrix.
But it's still part of the matrix. I before, 10 years ago, them understanding the business, most data engineers I worked with still roughly need to understand kind of the business and some kind of concept of another. Well, vast majority of the time, they'd be like, how can I optimize this Spark job? Or how can I do this Python Airflow component? And that's how I impact the business. And now, no.
Right. What are you really answering? And that's another piece of it. I think that a lot of teams get into this Jira ticket machine kind of method.
Yeah.
Right. That they get a ticket, they get they feel rushed to complete it, and so they just accept what it is and move forward. But there's so much value in taking that moment and understanding, to your point, of what's the business value of what I'm doing. What answer are we providing to the business by providing this data, right? And is this because I have, in one of my engagements, I have a team that I'm leading, and they're nearshore people from Uruguay, but I'm trying to get them to understand, don't just process, understand what that business impact is, and make sure that we don't already, make sure we don't already have something that exists. And then also make sure that it's not something that we could combine with other things. And is it even worth our time to do? So understanding those pieces, and because so many tickets have come through of, oh, I need this data. And we ask them, well, what's it going to answer? And they're, well, it's just something that I thought would be interesting that I might be able to use. And you're like, how are we improving? Right? I mean, and so understanding that context of how we impact the business from a ROI standpoint, so that when somebody comes down and says, hey, you've blown, 60 grand in salary this month, what did you accomplish? We could say something, right?
Yeah, exactly. I would say, yeah, that's not uncommon at all. And I'm trying to think about going back to start of our conversation was with thinking about the AI career. If you were to score one today, you're because obviously you got, okay, so you start with a team of 2 juniors, right? You coming in, you got maybe 1 super senior data engineer that's kind of, they're used to their way. And then you kind of have some intermediate engineers that could be a senior if you look sideways or whatever. And you just gotta kind of give everybody guidance. You got to change the person that's with the right guardrails. Be like, hey, listen, I love the fact that you have to craft all your Python code, and we could touch on all these other concepts, which are really important. And I understand that you like copy and paste from ChatGPT or whatever, but you like only do that because like Stack Overflow is just garbage now,
Right?
and you don't really want to change that. And you're like, all right, fine. Versus like sometimes the juniors on the other extreme are like, yeah, Claude said this. Obviously, that's totally right.
Yeah.
And then I gotta, as you're making this career ladder for these, like, let's just say, like, let's take analysts out of this for a second. You need to like, all right, these are the signals that I'm looking for as you step along, like junior, senior, staff, principal. What would you think?
Because I think that from a junior standpoint, I want them to, when I've done interviews for juniors, I want them to understand at least a basic understanding of Python, right? I want them to understand, especially for a lot of what I'm hiring for, it's a lot of Databricks stuff. And so I want them to understand some Spark. I want them to understand how to write a Python script to at least, pull data and maybe do some cleaning, some basic cleaning. I want them to understand, obviously, SQL to a decent extent of understanding window functions, I'd like them to understand, Z ordering and or liquid clustering, partitioning, some type of efficiency, understand the difference between, columnar storage versus row storage, right? And when it comes to how we're going to do, how we're going to look at efficiency and things like that. I don't care whether they understand Databricks or Snowflake or Azure or AWS. But I want them to understand those basic building blocks from a junior perspective. And I want to see that they're able to use their tools, that they're not just going to immediately, as soon as they hit a roadblock, they're going to ask, oh, I don't know how to do this. How do I fix this? Right.
Yeah, right. And it's like it's just feeding off of that. It's like when you're going through the concept, like if you're like a junior, it'd probably be like, oh, data modeling is a DBT thing, right? Or it's like it's a medallion architecture, and then you're gonna have to take them aside and be like, well, no. Those are despite what vendors and a lot of other people do, and they merge these concepts. So like, well, like let's just talk about language here. And then as they become a senior, and then like hopefully they're doing some form of data modeling, where at least they bother to pull out a napkin for a second. and doodle. And you're like, okay, great. Like, okay, you're like, okay, are you thinking about partitions? Are you thinking about growth over time? What happens when failure happens? Because we're in data engineering, failure happens all the time.
Right.
So the question is like, how do we deal with it? And then like for a staff, it's just like, the expectation is they come to you and they're like, here's the diagram, here's my rough, like my stab at solving this problem, but it's not just my problem, it's this squad's problem, that other squad's problem. And I think we can solve, two problems in one go, or three, or whatever end problems if we do this solution. And we're gonna have a conversation with engineering or whoever it is, because they need to go solve this thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I expect for like, I don't know, lead staff level up, which like they're not just like, so this is my lane.
Right. They're looking outside of more holistically, right? That senior staff, or not senior maybe, but staff lead principal type position. Yeah, they need to be able to look more holistically and be able to have a little bit more critical decision making. And like you said, for a senior, like I don't expect a junior to understand data modeling really in depth because they've only done perfect world stuff probably anyways. But I 100% expect when I ask a senior level person, explain to me what your process is for data modeling, to explain to me how they're normalizing data or how they're breaking tables up, or hell, even if they want to use one big table, that they're explaining to me why they want to use one big table. Not I get but what I've been getting honestly during interviews has still been they're telling me their ETL process or their ELT process, right? They're telling me their pipeline process. And I'm like, that's not data engineering. I mean, that's not data modeling. That's
No, I think a lot, and also a lot of people, there's no hate to DBT, because like DBT is basically when it came out, like I've like been using it since probably well before version 1. I loved it. I love what it created. I love what it did. It created like less isolated data community, I find, and like ivory tower work. And but what it did happen was it changed like the idea is just like people were like, okay, I have like a staging model and an intermediate model, and I'm like, no, they're just like they're not even concepts necessarily. And then somebody's like, I was like, okay, well, did you think about data modeling? And I got lectured by a principal engineer, which was one of my old bosses, and I was arguing like one big table is the way to go for the future, and I would say like this is why you can learn things. One, I was wrong. One big table only belongs in a very few select groups of businesses.
right.
I think there are places that you can do with like some really good optimizations, but like a vast majority of the time, like that's just because we're like kind of lazy and we're like, oh, I don't know what this means, so I should just smash it in one big table.
Right. I do think that DBT, but I mean, to your point, no hate on DBT. It came along and provided us this structure for testing and things that a lot of engineers never even thought of before DBT came along. Which has been great, but you're right. It confuses people on the modeling piece, and it made it really easy. I mean, SQL is something that I'm of the opinion that almost anybody can learn.
Yeah, I mean it's like basic logic, except for the like, weird thing of having select at the top and the from at the bottom. That always drives me nuts.
Yeah,
I know people try to correct it for the years, but I think that ship is long gone for a little bit. And God, I'm gonna have such a hard time changing that habit now when coding or even reviewing code. The so I mean, what do you think about like career ladders for analysts? Like how are you seeing that shape up now?
well, and I think that, I mean, to your point of, I don't think that a lot of runway left before they're just going to have to start learning the engineering piece and or the machine learning piece, right? They can't just be an analyst. Uh, I think that they're going to have to, especially with these new tools, right? Because there are so many tools out there that can create all these great visualizations. The problem is making sure that they are consistent and pretty, which is something that engineers are just not good at. We don't make things pretty.
Yeah, we
really
have a tendency yeah, whatever. GPT can help me make pretty. No, I like painting and drawing and stuff like that, so I'm biased. You even look at my background, like Chris, yours is blurred out. Mine's got like artwork all over. So,
yeah, mine's super basic and super simple. It's not
I mean, my grandmother was an artist for Disney, so she biased. My mom's an artist, so. But on the other side, my dad and my grandfather were both accountants and like physics people, so it's quite the dynamic. But like I would say, like yeah, it's an unusual combination that I agree. I would say like what we used to call data scientists, like a data scientist would talk to like a data engineer, and then ultimately before data scientists would become data engineers because they had no choice. And now it's just like, well, actually, you kind of can just be a full stack data scientist now, or at least in the near future, where it doesn't mean that there's not like occasionally like just hard problems that require like dedicated data engineer to understand those things. But like I would imagine that the ability to get up and go is going to be so dramatically reduced.
Well, I think especially if you're in a business where you have some data engineers already and you've got a medallion architecture or whatever your mesh or whatever vault, whatever you've got going on, where whatever words you want to use today.
Yeah.
I think it, and I see it now. I'm starting to see it now where I have a data scientist that he has gone off and taken one of the whole domains that we have in the in our medallion model of and taken the whole domain, and he's gone off and created a whole bunch of gold stuff and like on his own. And I'm like, I need you to be consistent with our standards, though. Can you come back and be consistent with the rest of our standards? Because they're all kinds of variant and different than.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a whole like tangent here. We could talk about governance, security, and access, and proliferation of like Claude Cowork, which I think is like well-meaning, but like a massive security hole.
Yeah,
just so big. And I think there's like this gold rush. It's like, well, I mean, I just spent 5 minutes and yeah, I can use a Python script to grab data, which I get. And vast majority is like, I don't want to be sacred components for that. Cause like, honestly, sure, go right ahead. If you're in finance and you just want to grab data from like an accounting system and you want to do that, I'm like, honestly, go right ahead. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean you like crazy resilient data pipeline. Like, that's the other thing is like I find like data engineers like we're like, oh, this should be like resilient, and like I'm like, well, is it hurting anybody? They were going to copy and paste into Excel anyway, and the only difference is a few clicks. So like, and if they're responsible, if they're reporting a thing or doing a thing and they want to take the responsibility of ownership for that, then okay.
Yeah, and finance in particular, I think is the one domain like in any business that is bad about that, right? They're going to pull it, they're going to dump it into Excel, and they're going to combine it with some other file that they already have sitting on their desktop somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, Excel's amazing. I don't even like crapping on it anymore because I'm just like, it's just part of life. It's just what it is. It's a lightweight. It's like SQLite, but with a UI.
Right. But going back to the kind of the career ladder, though, I think that's the analyst career ladder. I think the analysts are going to be pushed into understanding more things like predictive modeling and propensity models and and even to the point of maybe even starting to look at data as a product, right? And maybe the analysts can help, the analyst scientists can help us wrangle some of that data as a product type path for things. You know where I'm going? See where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the whole concept of like engineers. So like, it's so funny. It was like work having been back in engineer, and everybody was like so sick. It was like, well, we have an application system that processes transactions. I was like, okay, first you have a cart, right? And you hope maybe you host it. Now it's Shopify, maybe not. Or like you local host it, and then you process transaction. No, you're outsourcing it to like Adyen or Stripe or whatever, right? So you're like telling another API to do a thing. And so like I think in the AI space that we're heading towards, like the blurred lines of all of that is more about domain knowledge than it is about like the physical like changing of stuff sometimes.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? The domain knowledge, and to be honest, the analysts and the scientists, the analysts in particular, do a better job communicating with the business than a lot of the engineers out there do. The engineers need to learn, right? I think that's part of the soft skill learning curve for some of the engineers out there. Some of them do a fantastic job, right, of communicating with the business and understanding that kind of business acumen side of things and how to communicate to them with them. Um, and some of them just don't. And a lot of analysts have had to. That's like half their job is to sit down with the business and understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a good product manager, right? Like they
Yeah.
just sit down and try to understand like business pain. That maybe the difference, the blurring difference is that the data analyst we come to it with more of like a mathematical concepts, right? And thinking about like how we're going to measure a thing, how we're going to do a thing. It will be interesting over the next little while where I could see the data analyst in a product manager roles blurring very much.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because now you're doing the research, and if you have that background in data work, you're like, why have this line necessarily about like passing it over?
And that's funny because I see that with Salesforce architects already, where they're having to blur that line between, am I a Salesforce architect or am I the Salesforce product manager, right? And they've already straddled that line and have for years, a lot of them. But I think, yeah, the analysts are going to have to do that too. And in some businesses, I think the engineers are going to have to do that, because I think that some businesses don't have a ton of analysts, and the engineers are going to have to figure that out, right? Um,
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. I think that the ability now to be like a multi-potentialite person is like, before, like, I mean, you and I go back in our data and software engineering days, like I was coding C in the 90s. It's like, yeah, I don't do that anymore. It's just like that's like to make like even small modifications of a video game I was hacking around, like, Lord, that'd be like a day's work.
right? Yeah. I mean, I was doing a lot of like VB.net and Java back in the day, and I'm thankful I don't have to do all that, fool with all that stuff anymore, right?
Yeah, right. And then I got like levels of abstraction. Then I did, C, then I did I did basic C, then
Yeah.
I was convinced I should learn assembly for like 2 minutes, and then I was just like, what am I doing here? Like, what? This is super painful. Why would anybody do this?
Have you
And
seen that
then,
little? There's that little comic strip about when you do this with assembly, like you shoot yourself in the foot, right? And the guy shoot. Yeah, have you seen that? It's one of those XCD.
oh, XKCDs. Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah,
No, it's probably I've seen millions of them, but I
yeah.
probably have at one point. But yeah, I could see that like being resist. Like I'm learning myself. I'm like learning Rust right now, right? And well, like why would I do that? And I was just like, well, I put like an 8 week, 2 month timeline this year because I know that 90% of my Rust code that I'm gonna do in the future is gonna be auto generated.
Yeah.
But like I have to understand the concepts. I have to
Mhm.
understand the core concepts of that. So I'm like forcing myself to hand code chunks of this, which is so painful right now. I'm so used to it.
Yeah.
And I'm like trying to understand and instill these concepts that I've forgotten over time. But then I can go, my bet is that I'll be able to go a lot faster. And those are kind of the things I want to see with my engineers when I'm hiring them.
I think it goes back to being able to figure out what the tools are and how to use the tools, right, efficiently and safely. Um, because I think that also, to your point of going in there with Rust and manually learning things, that's why I'm looking for at juniors that to at least understand those basics, right? Because they need to be able to at some point look at the code that's being generated for them and understand this isn't quite right, right?
Yeah.
Or different ways that I could do things. And um, I think that one, I think that there is a place for Rust. They definitely a place for Rust and different things. Rust is quick, it's fast. Um, but I also see kind of going back to that data engineer career ladder piece a little bit too, of they're going to have to understand more software engineering, right? That things are going to be a little bit more OOP structured, I think, as we move into more AI stuff and integrate with more AI stuff, especially if MCP like continues to ACP, whatever you want to call it today, it continues to take off, and we have these chatbots interacting with our data. I think that we need to utilize it, and data engineers are going to have to create API wrappers around some of their data so that the MCP is hitting these APIs instead of hitting the data directly. Or we're going to
Yeah,
have this very strict semantic layer of so that the LLM understands it. But I think it's better and more consistent if we have API wrappers around that data and the
yeah,
MCP.
we'll see how that goes. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's like all these kind of like semantic layers and stuff like that, which I think like fine. That's like what business objects in the 1990s. Joe
Yeah.
was talking about that,
Oh
and I
my
was like,
God, I hate
and
that.
then I was like, what? No, and then I was like, go back through my knowledge base. I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I used to
Exactly.
do.
I
Yeah,
don't
I was like, oh wow, okay, and I'm just like, yeah, you just like you're like naming a concept or naming like what the rows and columns mean and when they're together, or like what is that? You know, I was like, you mean data modeling, but okay.
yeah.
And then you're just naming a thing. And I think that's like it's powerful. It's what is old is new again. But I think like it's so funny. Like a couple years ago, I used to do this doing
GraphQL stuff.
GraphQL stuff, and I was just like, oh my god, this thing is such a pain in the ass. Like, just give me a REST API. And now I'm like, actually, in this new world, this is like not the worst
Not a bad
concept.
thing anymore. Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. And that's like I have a constantly evolving schema. I can, add things and important properties and keep the old ones. And then maybe it's get discontinued over time and keep that. I was like, that could work. That could work. And before I used to like, why would anybody do this? And now I'm like, oh, okay. Well, now it's not so bad.
Yeah. 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 It just, there's so many things.
There are a million things. Like you're like, oh, don't forget that MCP is not an API. Don't just wrap your API. You have to think about it a little differently. And I'm just like, okay, take a second. Let me like compute that and what that means.
Yeah.
And you're just like, think of an MCP as like a collection of USB sticks and like different tools that you can do, not just like a simple like endpoint. And I'm like, oh, all right.
Yeah.
Let me think about this.
Right. It gets a bit more complex than I led people to believe. But yeah. Definitely. But because the alternative though is that you just let an LLM loose on your silver data, right? And then it may or may not return the same result twice for the same person.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on these concepts obviously because I have to at work. Like, it's just mandatory for the business, and I think a lot of people, it's not half bad. Just going on medium raw data is like going on it. The thing is it gets really interesting when you start spanning multiple systems, and you realize, like, if you as a human being get confused on these things, you very quickly realize that the agents also quickly get confused about the concepts.
Yeah.
So if you're joining, say, your HubSpot CRM versus like your email platform versus your application source, and you're kind of merging them all in, you just like, here's all the raw data, here's all the systems. Like, at some point, you're going to have to identify different things for the agent to know.
Yes. And that goes back to that context piece, right? And goes back to documentation, right? I mean, the thing that we all hate to do. And making sure that we've documented things well enough for something or somebody else to come back and pick it up and run with it.
Yeah, but that's expectation. So that's exactly what you got to talk about, like the analyst. If you think about the analyst, and we're all being followed around by recording devices these days and like stuff, and you're just like talking to the business, and the business being another person, and you're like, hey, there's a definition inside your ERP or accounting system, in the back end, it says, whatever column 65A.
Yeah.
And it's got a bunch of product things in it. And I don't really know what it is. And you sit down with them and they're like, oh, this is like a tariff code when I'm exporting to the EU, but we standardly do to the United States, but this is what it is. But like somebody got lazy, or that's just like their accounting system just automates like custom name fields.
Yeah.
Unless you have that like meeting, unless you have that, you would have no idea. You would just be like random string of characters or whatever.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And it cracks me up with juniors. They just take things for face value, right? And that's where that questioning, making sure that they understand to ask questions, right? That it's okay that they don't know everything, that nobody's expecting them to know all that business context, that they need to ask somebody a question. Because I see the analysts do it too. Like they'll look at junior analysts, will come in and look at something and they'll be like, I can't figure this out. I'll just leave it the name it is and hope that everybody else understands what it's supposed to be. And I'm like, no, go talk to the business, go talk to somebody, have that conversation, use your soft skills, be personable, and have that conversation. Um, and so I think that from an analyst standpoint, like that's one of the core skills for a junior analyst, right? And then, but I think from a career ladder standpoint, I think analysts need to turn into more what we're calling analytical engineers, right? Right
Mhm.
now. Engineers need to swing that pendulum back the other way and have a little bit more soft skills and have more interaction with the business. And the analysts are going to have to circle back around to that scientist piece, I think, and learn some of that machine learning. And then we have these architects that are sitting out here too, and the engineers are going to have to. So, what are I guess that's my question to you too? Is are you seeing a merging of the um, architects and the engineers as well, or are you
Yeah, I
seeing?
mean, I do.
Yeah,
I mean, I actually never thought that they should have been separated, but
right.
uh and in recent years, I think in the near future, like I hope that when I'm interviewing senior data engineers in this space, it's like they're like more architects and thinking about how things come together more so than being like code slinging. Because I think that we're going to go back to like a systems fundamental, identifying when to use LLMs, identifying when to use machine learning. And maybe they don't understand the math behind it, or they have a rough understanding. So enough to guide the principles that they're going to choose.
Yep.
And they understand like, this is when I should be using it. AI hasn't abstracted the cold hard truth of infrastructure. Like you still need, do you want a Postgres database? Do you want an analytical data store? Do you want a combination of this? Do you want an overriding graph database? Why would you use one? And like, you
Yep.
kind of like need to actually like think these things through. It also, when they're in, obviously we're all using AI to guide our thinking on these things, is to understand like, do they actually understand the thing that they're presenting to you?
Yeah.
Right? Or have they just done like 5 minutes of Claude and they're
Just
good?
taking it for what it's worth, right? And they're taking it for what they assume it's worth. And
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. Right. And there's like tons of research showing that even Perplexity and all these other guys like will just blatantly fabricate stuff. I mean, not to say like most of my Stack Overflow comments I ever read was like learned truth.
right.
But like you did have like some kind of social signal because people would be like, yeah, like they'd upvote it, right? But it was like,
Yep.
what are we gonna have like factual AI things where people were like read it and be like, yeah, that's right, thumbs up. I
Yeah.
mean, I guess we kind of do, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Like a confidence. There should be like a confidence score that comes along with it, right? Um,
absolutely. They're so confident. It's super confident. It's like talking to a junior engineer. Absolutely the best choice. It is like I was doing one recently. I'm working on this like data parity engine because like due to data diffing is super old school, but I think it's actually very important. And a lot of people, there's a couple open source projects, but anyway, the main thing is just like I have a very specific design spec I want to do to eke out some really high performance. But it's like, yeah, you're right. You're so good. Yeah, it's totally cool. Like, egg me on. And even though I gave it strict, like be a jerk architect, like that
Yeah.
old cranky architect that we all don't want to talk to, but they're always right, like that kind of direction.
Yeah.
And it still was like just totally like went sideways. And I gave it like I don't know, an argument, and I said, and this is for my own skills only. No, we should be using TOML rather than YAML for this kind of configuration. And it's like, oh yeah, absolutely right. And I was like, oh my god, like, seriously?
Yeah. 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 I have to always, anytime I've asked AI something, I always have to be like, okay, give me absolutely brutal feedback on this and tell me. I usually have to explicitly ask it to tell me, why is this wrong? Why is this not the right approach? And then it'll be like, oh yeah, I didn't think about it this way. It's always like, oh, I'm sorry, I've missed that, or I didn't think about it that way, or of course.
Yeah, I guess the thing that's going to be really interesting is just like when we can blow, like when a junior engineer, it's like one of the things I'm working and thinking on like very extensively right now is like where the cost of failure is, like you can do that like 3 or 4 times in a pipeline of some kind and blow it away, but the failure isn't going to be so high that it blows your foot off, like the XKCD
Right.
comic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like kind of the thing I want, like with AI engineering and data. It's just like the cost of a misstep is like the blast radius is so small, so that there's just like proper guardrails and protections. And then honestly, I could see in the near future, like per engineer doing hundreds of releases a week, right? But maybe only 3 or 4 of them they're actually getting into the nitty gritty, and the rest are just like things that they're kind of supervising.
Basic. Yeah. Yeah. Because I do think that, because one of the skills that engineers have is this orchestration, right, piece. And especially when you get into like a senior level, staff level, of this higher level orchestration piece. And I think that we will be orchestrating and managing other agents that are doing a lot of that work, right? We'll be reviewing, they'll be reviewing and kind of orchestrating some of that work. That's being kind of auto-generated by AIs, right? By either agents or things like Claude Code and Perplexity and um,
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah, I completely agree. I would be interested, but like going back to everything we talked about, like career ladders that I need to set today to give enough guidance for people to see in the future, like 2, 3 years. That's a hard one, right? Just because of how fast the industry is changing so fast. Like if I was in a big company, like one of the bigger
One of the
big
main
ones that I used to work for, let's think it's got a, I wouldn't say particular names, but one of the biggest companies on the planet that does everything. It's big box. It's got a yellow and blue logo. And then I used to work for a big trading company, starts with a V. Like the same thing, like they're putting it in, like their speed of change is like for them, it's probably pretty fast. But like for the startups that are happening right now, like
like
it's like it's just so. I mean, like right now, I'm working for one. It's just like our rate of change is so fast. Like and we're all like it has to go faster because we could be wiped out by Claude and Markdown file. So like, how do you secure? What are the things that you need to do? And so the expectation is like when I'm looking at the people that I'm hiring, I'm looking at like the people on my team. I'm like, all right, if you're an army of one, could you achieve all the things that you need to achieve? And how can I make that happen for at least from a data perspective?
yeah.
And like how do I make sure, for career wise, like what are the skills that I would think that you'd want? I was like, okay, well, they have to understand like what an agent is, like how do you prompt, what is prompting,
Mm-hmm.
and not just like dumping strings. It's like, are you thinking about like actual like type safe prompts, like what's an eval, and like like all these kind of new concepts. And vast majority of people in the startups kind of get it. A lot of people in the enterprise space that I've worked in, they are like not even close.
Well, and I think so many people in the enterprise space don't get exposed to it unless they're going out there and trying to be exposed to it. I don't I see still with especially larger enterprises, um, they're they're not giving people the tools to be exposed to it. Um, so they have to go out and and learn it kind of independently on their own. And how do we do that? How do we change that? Because the fear, I think, for enterprise companies is still that security piece, right? We still roll back to, they don't want to give people access to it because they're afraid that they're going to dump proprietary information into it, and then it's going to be immediately in the world.
Yeah, not wrong, but at the same time, like people are doing like, shadow IT all over the place because of like, if you can't do that, so this like, how are we going to do that in a responsible way? I mean, it's so interesting, like, and so just like thinking about career and like how I'm hiring people or thinking about people, it's just like, okay, tell me about the last thing that you taught yourself. Like, what is the things? Not necessarily AI things. What are the skills and interesting things that you learned back? I don't know. I always think like humanities and logic are like core pieces that for understanding.
Yes, I've always thought that critical thinking was something that was extremely important for everybody to know, and it's so rare to find people that really can teach themselves and critically think about a problem and a solution, and think through, not just jump on that Claude bandwagon as soon as it gives you the answer and just take it and run with it, right? And just, they actually look at it and they think about it and think, is this the right path? Should I go down this other path? What are my pros and cons? Actually taking the time to balance all those things, and developing that in people, I think, is one of the most important things that we could do, especially going forward into the future, is looking at different tools, that different skills that are coming down the pike, different things that are coming down the pike, and figuring out, is this worth my time, or do I need to sidestep this and focus on this other thing over here, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's wild. I mean, man, I never thought things would go this fast, but hey, here we are.
It goes incredibly quickly right now. But I again, I think the important thing is figuring out what's important, right? What is going to be actually separating out the noise from the value, right? That's always.
Yeah, I think that's like an important piece. Like, in my team, I'm very strong. There's a person I work with. Like one of my first hires was a data enablement, or data products essentially. Enablement is pretty good because it's like that's the point, is to enable the business. I like it, like using the word enablement.
Yeah.
And it's just the whole point is like, okay, so we have this data, we have all these hundreds of thousands of tables coming in. It's like we're producing reports, we're producing source data. It's like, okay, what's the value of this? Like, how do we structure understanding, combining data? Like, what is this? If you got all the best data in the world and the most perfect mart, what would you actually drive as an outcome? And I think that's a really clean. It's, what, it doesn't have to be complicated. I think people are like, oh, this sounds so much. I was like, no, it's just like, is it? Do you have to report out to I don't know, environmental agency? Do you have to report to the board? Do you have to create recommendations in your e-commerce product? Like these are like, I was like, okay, and if you just like, what is it? 5 minutes of your time in an Excel sheet, something you did in the school is like, oh, okay, well, 100,000 people come to my website, 10% people convert. Right now, my recommendation engine should convert like 1% better and increase X. Like, you don't need to get crazy, but you should probably just take a step back from the product manager's perspective when you're doing data work and be like, all right, like, what's the rough value of this thing? And then sometimes it's even better. Somebody's screaming for like a particular automation, and you just look at it and you're like, I know you spend like 15 minutes or an hour a month and it's such a pain in the butt, but like, it's not really worth automating. It's like, it's 1 hour of your time and it does all this other stuff. Now with AI in the loop, you're like, hey man, those 1 hour jobs, like, if we organize it properly, like you could probably do it.
Yeah. probably do it in a minute.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like you should probably do it now. You should probably you probably should just wait for permission from the business. It's like or solve it. And hopefully you don't like delete your chart of accounts.
Right. Awesome.
Well, I have to go. I'm gonna take some. I think this is probably gonna send me the notes from this thing. I'm gonna take this down. I'm doing a write up for a career ladder. I'm gonna take some of this stuff. I got some stuff from Reddit. I got some stuff from here. I got some other books. My friend, Shane, he's done. He's talked about this stuff before. So I'm just trying to like come up with something for me to think to give direction from juniors to like staff level engineers with this new kind of train of things. And like honestly, I'm shrinking titles. Like if you're a data scientist and analyst, kind of in a conversation, it's like the expectation is if you're an analyst, then you probably have to have some kind of mathematics background and data science component to it with product thinking, frankly. And then the data engineer, you're going to be maybe a low grade analyst, but guess what? You're going to be in those data models, and the expectation is that. And you probably will talk to some stakeholders. Maybe it's more about moving the data than maybe coming up with outcomes per se, but like the expectation is like, yeah, you do got to go talk to the users.
Yep. Yes. And I think as you progress, like I always go back to the biggest thing. When I was at AT&T, the biggest thing was always when I looked at, are we going to progress somebody to the next step? Have they developed the decision-making skills to be able to make those higher level decisions? Right. I mean, that's just had always been the biggest piece of that. Can I trust them to just go off and make those decisions on their own, basically? Right.
I don't know. We'll see. 50% chance. We'll see. 50-50.
Especially when they move from like a senior to staff level or principal level position, like can I trust them to just go off and make these decisions or not?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think going back to the having those hard conversations, like I think the expectation is like honestly in the new way of things, like it's just going to be constantly like, yeah, you do have to have those if you're going to have value in your career, you're going to have those kinds of conversations all the time.
Yep. Absolutely. Awesome, man.
Thanks, Chris.
Good talking to you.
Always.
All right.
Later. Bye.
See you.